Released in 1986, mere months before Top Gun took the world by storm, Iron Eagle is the story of Doug Masters, a plucky high schooler and Air Force brat who also happens to be a private pilot. He mounts a rescue mission to recover his captive father, a high-ranking F-16 pilot that was shot down under nefarious circumstances. With the US government unwilling to save him, Masters jumps into action by enlisting the help of a tough-as-nails Air Force colonel, played by Gosset Jr., and Doug's super troop of high school buddies. While the story is totally outlandish in most every way and packed with 80s movie tropes, Iron Eagle has become a cult classic while still drawing the ire of many. What gets some all up in a twist about this movie is its reputation for giving the starring F-16 a seemingly endless supply of weaponry. It's like the bottomless, never-reloaded gun magazine of 80s action movie fame, but supersized to multi-role jet fighter proportions. Throughout the flying scenes, we see Doug's fighting Falcon unload a lot of weaponry. It seems straight-up comical at times, but just how many bombs, missiles, and cannon rounds did Doug actually fire? Well, you're about to find out. So sit down, strap a tape player to your thigh, crank up the Queen, and get ready as we launch back to the 80s for the definitive audit of all the weapons fired off of Doug's F-16 during that fictional rogue rescue mission. So first, let's take a look at what the F-16 depicted in Iron Eagle is actually capable of carrying. The F-16 model used in Iron Eagle is the F-16B, the two-seat variant of the F-16, and definitely the one you'd want to take with you if you're looking at adding a passenger on a rescue mission, even though that too makes no sense in reality. The F-16B can carry around 15,000 pounds of stores, divided up between bombs, air-to-ground missiles, fuel tanks and pods, as well as AIM-9 sidewinders. While the number sounds extremely impressive, it's nowhere near an operational reality, with upwards about half of that being the heaviest loadouts put into action for normal operations. It was also armed with an M61 Vulcan 20mm Gatling gun, with 511 rounds of ammunition and 5,700 pounds of fuel internally. A few of the hard points that would carry weapons are usually taken up by fuel tanks. One 300-gallon tank on the centerline station, or two 370-gallon tanks under the wings, or both. Combined, these would add roughly 7,000 pounds of fuel, over doubling the F-16's internal reserves. In the movie, we see four primary weapons featured on the F-16, as seen in the depiction of the stores screen on one of the cockpit multifunction displays. It shows a 30mm cannon, which is a larger cannon than the F-16 actually carried. There was a potted 30mm cannon the Air Force made available to its F-16 fleet, but it only saw combat service in the opening days of Desert Storm and was quickly taken out of service. This pod isn't shown in the movie, but it is mentioned. However, whenever the F-16s fire their gun, it shows the jet's internal 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon firing. Regardless, let's assume they just meant the jet's internal cannon. Iron Eagle also prominently depicts the F-16 correctly carrying the AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missile. When it comes to bombs, things get more confusing. Visually, the bombs slung under the F-16s in the movie are clearly representative of Mark 82 500-pound free-fall bombs. However, they are referred to as both clusters and Mark 82s in conversation. At the same time, the jet's fictional stores display calls them weasels. This sounds like a cool name they assigned to bombs in pre-production, but never actually put those terms in the script, so nobody in the movie actually refers to them as such. The earlier Block F-16A and Bs of this era's only air-to-air missile is the AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range heat-seeking missile. F-16s didn't get a beyond visual range missile until 3 years after Iron Eagle was released, when the Block 15 ADF version of the F-16 was introduced, giving the Fighting Falcon AIM-7 Sparrow capability. The AIM-120 AMRAAM, which really changed the jet's air-to-air capabilities beyond visual range, would come even later. Finally, we have the Hades bomb, a fictional, wide-area napalm bomb of sorts, used to create a set piece during the movie's climactic final action sequence. Prior to flying a mission to commit a whole series of high crimes and potentially start a war with another country in order to execute a laughably poor plan to save Doug's dad from execution, Doug and Chappie hop into an F-16B to fly one single training sortie. Yes, that's right. A key part of Iron Eagle's plot is that Doug's dad, a senior Air Force officer, had been illegally training his teenage son to fly the F-16. You gotta love 80s movies, right? The whole purpose of this exercise isn't a drill for the actual mission, but just soothe Chappie's doubt in Doug's ability to employ the Fighting Falcon as a weapon. Chappie demands Doug turn off his knee-mounted cassette player, and they roll in on the training range, dropping 2 bombs at the range targets that predictably miss. Then Chappie says to try again with a Mark 82. We never see these weapons come off the aircraft, but the stores display in the jet shows 2 sidewinders being fired. And curiously, no other external stores on the aircraft. These also impact the ground wide of the target. But this is just the first of many editing errors, and we'll come back to that topic in a bit. Then, a defiant Doug, the 18-year-old Cessna pilot that's been secretly flying F-16s with his Air Force officer dad, says he's doing it his way. He kicks on his tunes and makes another run with his personal soundtrack blaring. This time, we see his store screen reflect 2 more sidewinders fired, which obliterate the targets. And then we see a series of 2 bombs dropped and 5 explosions, more than we see being fired. But we'll chalk that up to the 80s montage effect and just go with what we see physically launched from the plane. So the total for the practice run is 6 weapons, but probably about 10 explosions. Even if you count 1 weapon per explosion and discount the silly editing errors we see in the sequence, we're within the realm of what an F-16 could actually carry for an air-to-ground sortie. After the training mission, and an extended sequence of Doug's friends, typical 80s super friends employing various hijinks to access several classified systems to arrange for 2 jets fully loaded, aerial refueling, and intel for the strike, Doug and Chappie have a heart-to-heart about the mission, and then they set off for the fictional Middle Eastern country holding his father. On the way to the target, the jets are shown with the 3 Mark 82s, 2 AGM-65 Mavericks, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders, and 1 jet has the fictional red-cased Hades bomb on its center line. Doug successfully completes his first ever aerial refueling after taking off from whatever mystery country Doug and Chappie are flying this mission from. The movie cuts to its store's management screen, and the numbers don't reflect what we see being carried previously, listing 2 Sidewinders, 4 Weasels, 2 Mavericks, and the Hades bomb. The basic loadout is pretty close to what we see in the aerial shots, but on the store screen the weapons are carried in very different places. It also shows a fuel state of 6,972 pounds. This is close to the correct amount of fuel for an F-16A, but the F-16Bs that are flown in the movie had its fuel capacity reduced by about 1,500 pounds of fuel to accommodate the second seat in the jet. Before the first battle begins, Chappie tells Doug he has 4 clusters and to use foil packs, chaff in the real world, to confuse French radar. Then after blasting in at low altitude, Doug executes a run to cluster bomb the runway, dropping 2 bombs. Chappie strafes a very explosive air traffic control tower and communications array, and the 2 then engage 3 MiG fighters, shooting down 1 with a Sidewinder. After the last 2 MiGs clear off to allow a clear shot for anti-aircraft guns, Chappie is hit, and Doug uses the cannon for a revenge strafing run, silencing them. Both pilots then shoot down a MiG each with cannon fire. For this first engagement, we see Doug has dropped 2 bombs. Chappie has fired 1 Sidewinder, and there is about 3 to 5 seconds of cannon fire, equally distributed between them. The M61 cannon fires at 6,000 rounds per minute, meaning about 100 rounds per second. So the entire 500-round load will be spent in about 5 seconds. If we're dividing that up equally at around 2 seconds of gunfire apiece, that's 200 rounds fired out of the 511 each F-16 carries. Between 2 F-16s, this engagement is plausible, at least in terms of raw stories available. Once again, we aren't counting explosions here, just weapons dropped. Chappie ends up having to eject from his jet over the Mediterranean, where there's always an Egyptian trawler nearby, ready to execute a rescue, as per 80s military action movie conventions, and Doug is left to extract his dad all alone. On the way to the enemy airfield, where his dad is being held, he listens to the famed recorded monologue from Chappie, where he reminds Doug to keep an eye out on those store screen. Good but unheeded advice for the Iron Eagle production team as well. As Doug fights his way to his father, he strafes some more anti-aircraft guns, engages in an aerial duel with some attack helicopters, destroying both with his cannon, and fires a Maverick at a communications tent. After demanding his father be moved to the airfield and getting no reply, he also destroys some oil tanks at a refinery. We don't see any real confirmation of what weapon is used, but the attack profile looks like a bombing run, and it appears there are bombs falling away from the aircraft, so we'll call it 2 Weasels. Doug's father is shot, so Doug takes his revenge by strafing multiple surface-to-air missile systems, launching a Maverick at another air traffic control tower, strafing more vehicles, and then drops multiple bombs. Finally, he arms the Hades bomb, pickles it off, and lands to snatch his father. His wounded dad safely aboard, Doug fires a Maverick on the ground at a vehicle, which isn't possible in real life. And the pair blast into the sky, It's worth noting that just before firing his third Maverick, a peek at the store screen shows them out of Mavericks, but with 2 weasels remaining. In this final air-to-ground sequence, we saw Doug fire 3 Mavericks, drop 5 bombs, use the Hades bomb, and let loose a lot of cannon fire, about 10 seconds worth in total. This is the one sequence that most cite as so horribly outlandish. But aside from every tent and truck being packed full of explosives, and the gun being used way more than it has ammo for, it's not as crazy as it seems. The amount of ordnance dropped is easily within the limits of what the F-16 could potentially carry in the battle, although it wouldn't be that nimble doing so until after it was released, and it wouldn't get far to a target area. Still, Doug has used basically twice the amount of ammunition his jet carries for its 20mm cannon in this part of the mission alone. But this isn't really an Iron Eagle problem. Virtually every action movie of the era featured seemingly endless magazines of all types of small arms and machine guns. With his father aboard, Doug calls out that he's got 2,100 pounds of fuel remaining, 2 Sidewinders, and 244 rounds of ammo left in the Vulcan cannon's drum. With enemy fighters closing in fast, Doug reverses his course to engage and shoot down 2 more MiGs with cannon fire, then flies an extended dogfight with the movie's aerial villain, missing him with his gun before downing him with a Sidewinder. Then, in the nick of time, a flight of U.S. Air Force F-16s approaches from the north and scares off the remaining 2 enemy jets. Doug then asks to lead the missing man formation, which also doesn't make any actual sense, in remembrance of Chappie, who is alive. Remember, Egyptian trawlers are everywhere in the 80s. They then head to the tanker. In total, for the entire mission, Doug employs 3 Mavericks, 7 Weasels, the Hades bomb, 1 Sidewinder, and about 3 times the amount of cannon ammunition the F-16 could carry. This equates to roughly 7,000 pounds of weaponry, 20mm cannon rounds included, if you assume the fictional Hades bomb weighs 1,000 pounds. When you break it all down, the general capabilities of the F-16 might be a bit overstated, especially the gunfire, but this is generally in line with what an F-16 could potentially carry on a single combat sortie, in terms of weight of ordnance alone. Although, they wouldn't get too far without external fuel tanks and aerial refueling. So that leaves one question left unanswered. Why the uproar and criticism? There's one thing you can point to as the sole reason why Iron Eagle seems to have airplanes with an endless number of weapons, and that reason is the entire way the movie is edited together. To put it gently, the editing in Iron Eagle is a mess due to the continuity throughout the film. And in filmmaking, continuity is the concept that once something happens, the next logical thing will happen, even if you don't see the whole process. For instance, Doug drops a bomb, and an instant later something explodes. We didn't need to see the whole process of the bomb falling all the way to the target, because our brains fill in the rest. Continuity is also consistency from one shot to the next, and this is where the movie commits many egregious errors. As an example, as Doug is escaping with his father, we see an external shot of his F-16 with no armament at all. Doug then says he has 2 Sidewinders on board, and as he reverses course, we can clearly see 2 Sidewinders on the rails. The training scene is even worse, as the store screen goes from a full load to 2 Sidewinders, and then after punching the tape on, the whole jet magically reloads itself, until it's time to drop the first weapon, and then he's just got 2 Sidewinders and 2 Weasels, and about 3,000 pounds less fuel after flying for just 15 seconds. To be fair to Iron Eagle, this was not an uncommon thing for movies in the pre-CGI era. Budgets were limited, so many movies didn't have the money to make sure every effect followed every beat in the story. Also, many effects were practical effects, and not digital, and practical effects can be very expensive. Many of the weapon shots in the movie are clearly from models, and they reused the same shot over and over. In the case of Iron Eagle, the F-16s we see on screen weren't even American. They were actually Israeli F-16s, with U.S. Air Force lettering and roundels slapped on them. As the Department of Defense refused to participate in a movie where an American plane was stolen and used to commit an act of war against a sovereign nation. This is why the setting looks very foreign, including the base infrastructure. The Israeli Air Force's Ramat David Air Base was turned into the fictional Beach Air Force Base as the prime filming location. Shooting in Israel is also why the F-16s wear desert camouflage, and not the standard gray scheme found on Air Force jets. The aerial bad guys were also pulled directly from Israeli flight lines, with IAI Kafirs standing in for enemy MiGs. If model planes are expensive, you can bet operating and filming real jet fighters that belong to another nation is exponentially more expensive than that. What you get into is a scenario where, due to budget and aircraft availability, you may only have a handful of sorties to get aerial footage. So you load the planes with loadouts that are representative of the story, and then you try to logically weave it all together. What you end up with is a story where visually you may see an F-16 where the weapons change constantly from shot to shot, simply because there wasn't the budget to film the whole thing the way the script demands. While this may be easier on the studio's pocketbook, it's terrible for the continuity of the end product. This is how you end up with Doug Masters flying an F-16 with 2 Mavericks and 3 bombs, but then he fires 3 Mavericks and drops 7 bombs. You might be able to slip editing like this past an audience once, but when your whole movie is filled with clips that don't visually agree with one another, people will take notice. This, paired with a laughably stupid plot, cheesy dialogue, and a rich helping of the decade's popular movie tropes, is a practical invitation for the viewer to pick apart the film's technical stumbles. In the end, Iron Eagle's magically armed F-16s really aren't that magical at all. Sure, their general capabilities are embellished, but it's really pretty conservative compared to any other movie of the era. When it comes to the amount of ordnance employed throughout the entire movie, and real-life weapons configuration aside, everything carried and launched was within the realm of what an F-16 could potentially carry on a real mission, at least in terms of weight and general quantity, minus the bottomless 20mm ammo drum and fuel tanks, of course. While the hate for Iron Eagle's zany plot and far-fetched ideas remain, the love for it has also grown a lot over the years. And the F-16 was the real star of the show, and it looked awesome up on the big screen, although it just couldn't compare with what Top Gun did for the Tomcat just a few months later. And while the movie's depictions of the Fighting Falcon's weaponry was laughable at times, the quantity of those weapons wasn't as egregious as many people seem to think.